It's 1028 live, man. This is bigger than live PD Nation. This is bigger than cops.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Doc Skinner with a special report tonight with an amazing woman who has been at the tip of many spears, for justice. And I'm really glad to call her my friend. We're going to jump right into it because she has so much to discuss. Ladies and gentlemen, may I please introduce Deborah Tavares.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like all of you to spend some time on our website, which is stopthecrime.net. YouTube took our channel down the beginning of February of 2021. Certainly the culture collapse that they're doing everywhere, and that is what happened. I have a very minor presence on YouTube at this time, but you can go to stopthecrime.net. You will see the YouTube video opportunity, but under that, more importantly, is our back channel, the Odessi channel, where we have all of our prior videos there, and more importantly, some of the new videos, like perhaps the one you're going to be hearing this evening, will be up and available for you on the Odessi back channel. I have many very, very important and recent interviews about transhumanism, what has happened with the super soldiers. I have literally world-breaking information over the last number of weeks on that back channel. And we're not risking that YouTube is going to take, again, what meager presence we still have. Now, I also have been running for a number of years another website called primarywater.org. And in a bit, I'm going to be introducing, in my opinion, one of the world experts now in and on the topic of primary water. And we're going to get into that in detail this evening because this is absolutely imperative. So the two websites that I'm going to be wanting and referring all of you to is primarywater.org. That's my website. And I link over to Pal Pauer's website, which is primarywaterinstitute.org. And I'll be repeating that throughout the program this evening. But before I bring Paul on, I want to go over some facts. And I can tell you that when I first heard Paul explain this to me a number of years ago, I wasn't quite clear on what he meant exactly. It was a foreign conversation. Not only is he Hungarian with a Hungarian accent, but just the concept that water did not initiate from rain and snowmelt. I hadn't really given it much thought. Maybe none of you have either. But until that fateful night, for a couple of hours worth of conversation, did I finally open my mind and my ears to a concept that was so out of sync with anything that I had heard on the media or in school ever before. And I dove into this headlong, literally dove into this water issue headlong, and made some pretty unbelievable discoveries. And we're going to be talking about that tonight. And I'm going to start out by saying on primarywater.org, we have half-page double-sided flyers that you can download and distribute far and wide. And far and wide, I would suggest you do, because we are being literally catapulted into an illusion that we are running out of water. And I'm going to read to you a number of World Bank documents, World Economic Forum documents, and some local papers, newspapers, that will show you the psyops behind this massive, massive, deadly lie. So it's important to understand that we have primary water, and we do not have a water shortage. Listen carefully. We do not have a water shortage. We can't let the PSYOPs media campaign frighten us about the scarcity of water. We don't have a scarcity of water. The Earth is the water planet, and the Earth continuously produces water from within, down below the mantle. In fact, water is a renewable. Hear this, water is a renewable. We have an abundance of water. Now, this is not to suggest that people do not conserve or wisely use water. This is to confirm with all of you that the controllers of this world, the overlords of this world, want to meter, cause water refugees, take over the food supply, and this is a massive land grab and so much more. And why would the corporate government agencies create the false science of water scarcity and the fear that we're running out? The goal is control, money, and creating compliance to water monitoring, required reduced water usage, and charging higher usage costs, all based upon our ignorance of where water really comes from. And I'm sad to report that out of fear, many people will forfeit their ranches, their farms, and livelihoods, believing that they are out of water due to this manufactured drought. So primary water is in abundance, and we must start looking down for water instead of up. And we'll explain that further in this timely and urgent broadcast this evening. Everyone must learn the water facts. Again, you can not only go to stopthecrime.net, where I have posted a very important video that I did a few years ago. It is entitled, and it's actually up on YouTube, on stopthecrime.net, and it is entitled Water Wars, Stealing Water for Profit and Power. And I discovered documents out of Israel and out of the UK and more, and I'll discuss a little bit of that this evening. I want to continue with a little bit of lead up before I bring on Paul, again, who will be adding to this conversation with his years of wisdom and who literally brought this information to my ears. So, again, we're not running out of water. The evidence will provide you with the knowledge to combat the corporate media fear campaign and spread the truth. You must spread the truth to everyone you know. And you must demand that, well, I had this in the flyer in the beginning, that we must demand that our cities access primary water to recharge the groundwater basins that have been overpumped. But I must say, the cities are all corporations. They are following the dictates of the global controllers, the Rothschilds, the sustainable development agendas and goals. And so the cities are not going. And I have been to so many local water agencies and have brought this up. I have videos where I'm standing there holding a water chart in front of a group of water regional department heads discussing primary water, and they're rolling their eyes. And of course, this goes nowhere, went nowhere. And now it's important that all of you take the facts, the truth, and literally, if you're able to get to water, as you will hear described this evening, it will be up to you to do that. So we cannot continue to be tricked for the benefit of those that intend to privatize the water for profits and control. So again, water is the renewable. We're not running out. The truth about water is intentionally kept hidden from you. by our overlords, which I described, and that there are many truths that are kept secret and are unacknowledged. And we would implore all of you, please, again, listen very, very carefully. But I want to talk about the beginnings of primary water, and that will lead into my introduction to Paul. Because we found on a very interesting internet search this document, and it's entitled The Primary Water Article That Wikipedia Deleted in 2016. So this was deleted from Wikipedia by our overlords, by our controllers. And parts of this document read as follows. The term primary water dates to a scientific paper in the Geological Society of Stockholm Proceedings of 1896 by renowned Finnish and Swedish geologist and mineralogist, explorer Adolf Erik Nordenski Old, and probably Paul can pronounce that much better than I. But he talked about and wrote a book about drilling for water in primary rock, for which he was nominated for the first Nobel Peace Prize in Physics. However, he died in 1901 before the first prizes were awarded. And this paper was translated into English and included in what is considered to be the primary water textbook. And again, this textbook that you're going to hear me read to you right now is a free download from either primarywaterinstitute.org or from the site that I handle, which is primarywater.org. You can download this for free. I wish you would before it's unavailable. When these were first printed, they were all bought up and destroyed. And fortunately, it is available to you, and I would recommend that you teach all of your children and everyone you know. The name of the book is New Water for a Thirsty World. And it was written by a University of Southern California professor by the name of Dr. Michael Salzman. And it was published in 1960, that's 1960, with the foreword, interestingly enough, from Aldous Huxley, in which largely traces the career of the German-educated mining engineer and pioneer of primary water and the geohydrologist Stephen Rees, of which Paul can discuss more about Stephen Rees. But they went on to say that such leading scientists as Nobel Prize winners Linus Pauling and Willard Libby, as well as the eminent geologist Ralph Arnold, collaborated with Michael Salzman during the 4 years he spent researching the subject as a result of numerous news articles that really discussed Rees's exploits during the 1950s. It was Rees who introduced the term primary water into English and the scientific lexicon by calling the new water he finds primary water because of its close association with primary minerals. And in 1957, the Encyclopedia Britannica Book of the Year wrote the following on the new water theory of Stephen Rees. And there's ability to get to that. And Stephen Rees of California formulated the theory that new water is constantly being formed within the earth by the combination of elemental hydrogen and oxygen, and that this water finds its way to the surface and can be located and tapped to constitute a steady and continuous and unfailing new supply of water. Again, this is in 1957 Britannica Book of the Year. So now, the nonprofit Primary Water Institute was founded in 2014 by longtime Rees protege Pal Pauer, P-A-U-E-R, to educate and train the next generation of primary water specialists. And I will tell you, it is with beyond great privilege that I had the fateful night of meeting Paul and learning about primary water so that I could assist with getting this information out far and wide. Paul has been doing primary water work since he was 18 years old. He's now in his 80s. He's drilled between 800 and 1,000 water wells in Kenya and Tanzania, Europe, Asia, and in United States and Australia as well. And so it is with my great pleasure, Paul, that I introduce you to the listeners so that everyone can learn water is renewable and we're not running out. So would you describe water to people? Because what is water? People don't know what water is.
Well, the only way I can describe it, which kind of is problematic to the average mind, because water is made of 2 parts hydrogen, which is a gas, highly explosive gas that we use to rocket fuel, and oxygen. Oxygen we have to have in order to even have combustion. So here we are on the water planet, because they refer to us as the water planet, because 7/10 of this planet or so is made of water. Indeed, we are the water planet. So how could we, on the water planet, not have enough water? Well, we have plenty of water. Some of it is not where we wish it would be as far as the type of water. Our oceans are made of saline water. Ironically, very similar in percentage as to sodium chloride to our blood. We are of this planet, and water is of this planet.
Well, Paul, yeah, I just want to stop you for a minute because I'm looking at this response, and I know that you're involved with this response because you're written up in this document that I referred to, the primary water article that Wikipedia deleted in 2016. And let me know if this sounds about right. So for the listeners, they're hearing about frequently asked questions, and they say, why haven't we heard of primary water before? And so why would you say that the majority of people have not heard about this? What is the problem here?
Well, the problem is the same as anybody else who holds up a glass of water and see it liquid. Well, this liquid is 2 parts hydrogen and 1 oxygen. Now, how did it get that way is the question. You know, God might even have something to do with that. Anyhow, in fact, our universe is made of creation, and H2O is 2 parts hydrogen and 1 oxygen. And then we somehow have to learn to accept that, especially in as much as nowadays we take hydrogen, we can separate water, we can take hydrogen out and use it for rocket fuel, or even for running automobiles. But when it's used as a liquid and in the automobiles, water drips out of the tailpipes when it's combusted. Anyhow, it is a very difficult concept to accept and understand. How is it made out of magma is another matter. We have no way to create that laboratory that would extract water from magma.
Well, Paul, I would like to add at this point, because when I was researching for the video I have up on stopthecrime.net, again, it's entitled Water Wars, Stealing Water for Profit and Power. And I discuss how millions of people will die because of the inability to access water. This is the goal. This is all part of a depopulation plan. And when we think about why we haven't learned about primary water, it goes unacknowledged, just like the overhead flying of the geoengineering and the controlled and planned weather events now. It's all unacknowledged. And so because people are so mind-controlled, I believe now, and so poisoned from the myriad of toxins that we all face, every one of us, I think that it's very difficult for people to learn new concepts and to hold on to new ideas. But when I was going through and creating that video that I did, and verifying what you were telling me, Paul, because that fateful night that I refer to, that was a wild concept for me, the idea that water was renewable. I started to look at, for example, you told me about Fly Geyser, F-L-Y Geyser. And would you describe to everyone that's listening what that was? Because I was taken aback by that. Explain where it's located and how that came about, Fly Geyser.
Well, Fly Geyser is located in Nevada, eastern Nevada, where the rainfall could not account for all this water coming in from the bottom, because, you know, you have to have new sources, something push water to the surface to be a spring. In other words, it doesn't come from nothing. And Fly Geyser, and it is an interesting thing to look up in on the computer. Fly Geyser was initially drilled. An attempt was made to drill a water well. I believe it is eastern, well, east of Reno, Nevada. It's not out somewhere where it doesn't exist. It is private property. They drilled a well in the attempt to get water for irrigation. Well, they didn't have enough money. There were all kinds of problems. They get down to a certain depth, and they stop. And some 100 years later, they decided, or the new owners decided, to go deeper. That's when they get this geyser that comes to the surface that actually colors the material, because along with water comes the minerals that have been dissolved on their way up from magma. So you have all the minerals present, and each mineral can be identified by the color that it leaves behind once the water has been evaporated. And Fly Geyser is a spectacular geyser. It's one of the most unusual ones on this planet because of the different mineralization through which it went through and dissolved before it surfaced.
Well, I want to say this, Paul. When we were talking and you were explaining the different features of water, and I thought about it because you explained and you told me, well, where do you think geysers come from that spray up out of the ground endlessly? And where do you think the oasis in Jericho that's been there for a couple thousand years in the middle of the desert comes from? Where do you think that water comes from? And then you had me think about when I was a kid and went to Hawaii, and I saw these beautiful cascading waterfalls coming from the tops of the mountains where it doesn't snow and it's not in a valley, and the water just keeps cascading out. And as I was starting to think about why aren't people asking that question, they're seeing the water bubbling up from down below, and they're really not realizing what they're seeing.
Well, you know, biblically, there's Abraham leading the Israelites out of Egypt. Now, you may be sure that he didn't have a stick with which he hit the mountain, and all of a sudden, here comes all this water out there in the middle of nowhere. That spring is still in existence in Jordan. So, all these many years in a place where there's no rainfall to speak of, these springs are an ongoing phenomenon, and they are recorded biblically.
Well, you know what? What I also found interesting that you told me about was, speaking of phenomenon, and we know that there isn't really a phenomenon. We know that primary water is the process of hydrogen and oxygen coming together, creating the gases and then the fluids and then the water, which can't be contained down below. It must surface. In fact, you and I did a video called Primary Water Explained. And I thought that was a great video because it showed the chart you made with the discussion about the fissures in the hills and so forth. And people can look that up, Primary Water Explained. In fact, we can likely link that up in this show this evening so that people can find it. But what I wanted to let everyone know is I found a document again while I was putting together that video that I've talked about, Stealing Water for Profits and Power. I found this. It says that in this information that I got out of Israel and England, it says that this chapter looks at the opportunities for businesses and investors which may arise from meeting the challenge of water scarcity. They go on to talk about the challenge of creating water scarcity. And scarcity is the most visible driver of demand for investment in the water sector. And they go on to say in this document that Governor Schwarzenegger's declaration of a drought in California in June of 2008, the water shortages in Atlanta, and the draining of Lake Mead, the spread of the Dust Bowl conditions in the Midwest, all have added to the sense of crisis surrounding America's water resources. And scarcity is a function of supply and demand. And they go on to say the problem we have is that demand for water is growing faster where water is least available. Now, I want to add this, and you can embellish upon this, Paul. You chose places to drill for primary water in areas that you were told did not have water. Is that right?
That's correct. And the easiest places to drill for those resources for me were in Africa, because there was not the bureaucracy that would limit our ability to locate and drill. And here in the U.S., each county, each state and county and municipality has their own rules on what they're going to do. Well, you understand that everybody's for clean, hygienic water. But in the U.S., they put so many restrictions on setbacks, this and that, on and on and on, so that it is you end up spending 2/3 of your time trying to find a bureaucracy that has the power and the authority to limit water, locating water and production of the same.
Well,
in Africa, on the other hand, it was a pleasure, because you could go in many places in East Africa. I think that Global Resource Alliance and our institute has done upwards of 100+ wells in East Africa where there shouldn't have been any water, because we were drilling into solid rock. But lo and behold, we got water. And those places have changed. And I would invite your audience to take a look at Primary Water Institute and the little footage we have on video to see the places where water was actually obtained. And let me tell you, if any of those places we missed, you would hear about that and not the successes.
I want to say this because I think many of the people that are listening need to understand the tremendous tragedy of what happened in Libya with Muammar Gaddafi. Because people can easily look this up. I did when I was first looking into all of this, and I was struck by what we did and what NATO did to Libya. So here's what happened. Muammar Gaddafi had constructed the largest irrigation system in world's history and tapping into primary water cycle. I'm understanding, Paul, that he was actually drilling for oil, but hit water. And you can actually see on YouTube the process of them, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, building this massive, massive labyrinth of plumbing under the desert floor, and it supplied 6.5 million cubic meters of fresh water per day to many cities in Libya. And it enabled Libya to grow fruits, vegetables, grains that were otherwise impossible to cultivate in the desert as it had been previously. The project cost Libya $25 billion equivalent in U.S. dollars and was completed without financial support from any major countries or loans from the IMF. And that was the problem. Rothschild was being bankrolled out of this. And in 2000...
the biggest problem was that Gaddafi had everything in his hand, and Libya did. It had the resources, it had oil, which it was selling on the world market. So he was collecting gold. He wasn't even dealing in currencies.
Yeah, he was going to back the dinar with gold, but then what, of course, happened is in 2011, that incredible achievement, the Great Man-Made River Project, was destroyed by NATO and the U.S. with depleted uranium nuclear bombs, cutting off the water supply to over 6 million people, hurling them all into a humanitarian crisis of which they've never recovered, because in the process of the bombing, they blew up the well drilling equipment that Gaddafi had purchased from London and said, well, they looked like rocket launchers. So
the point should be remembered that those very resources, all that water still exists in Libya. You know, if it was reconstituted, Libya would have an ability, by any calculation, to raise enough food to supply the food needs of Africa and maybe even Europe, because it's got the climate, it's got the space, it's got the resource, and now add solar, it can pump all the water it needs wherever, whenever. All it needs is fertilizer for the desert sands, which should be available from the cattle in Holland and elsewhere. I mean, you know, it is a tragedy. It's a human tragedy that is not used.
Well, it's all by design, as you know. And I want to get into what we're seeing here in Northern California, and I know that's generally where you are as well. For everyone listening, I am about an hour north of the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm in Sonoma County. We have been burning every year for the last few years. Now, we have now been told, because of the reduced amount of water, we may not have enough water to fight fires. And they've pulled the tankers that have been dropping the toxic red blood, really it's made of blood, to help prevent the fires from spreading. That's not allowed. That's off the books this year. Who knew that fire retardant contained blood? I didn't know, but now you do. So here's the front page of a section of our newspaper just a couple of weeks ago. Well, actually, last week, May the 11th. Today being Saturday, May the 15th of 2021. So this is what we read. Officials to cut water pumping. Move aims to preserve water supply in the reservoirs. And we're going to talk about reservoirs in a few minutes, because you'll be as dumbfounded as I was when I learned about the fact that we never needed reservoirs in the first place. But here's what our newspaper said, Paul. It said county supervisors approved and supported a plan to pump 20% less water than normal from the reservoir because they needed to preserve dwindling supplies in the local reservoirs. Remember, fake lakes also make quakes. But moving on, they're making less water available to more than 600,000 customers in Sonoma County and in northern Marin County by cutting the reserves. So we're seeing this type of fear-mongering in the newspapers every day here, every single day. People are becoming horrified. They're ridden with fear because we're into a manipulated drought. We're being told that we're going to be highly combustible this year. In fact, the states, all of the western United States, they say are going to be prone to historical fires unlike ever recorded before because of the planned weather events and the planned restriction and disinformation to all of us that water is a renewable. So think about this. Think about what is happening to all of us. Many new businesses are springing up around this illusion that we're running out of water. But I wanted to say this, Paul, and then I wanted to talk about the book, New Water for a Thirsty Planet. But I found this, and I was stunned. I found many documents, not only from the World Economic Forum, but the World Bank, and also some of our local adopted policies, which are the climate action plans. Now, all of your local cities have adopted restrictive measures for usage of all resources, including water and all fossil fuels. Just like fossil fuels were sold to us as a finite resource, something that we would run out of, which is what Rockefeller created to make unperceivable wealth by allowing us to think that our fuel came from dead dinosaurs. It never, ever did. It's a renewable as well. But we were tricked and fooled. All of your kids who have gone to school have been tricked and fooled. All of your kids are really on the verge of psychological breakdowns because they're told there are too many people using too much stuff. And so we're contributing to a very sick, psychologically unwell society by all of this mass deception that we are accepting by lack of due diligence to learn the truth. And you're hearing some truth tonight that I hope all of you spread the beauty of renewable water resources. So here's what I found. This is on madeblue.org, made, M-A-D-E, blue.org, and it says water scarcity. We have taken water for granted for too long, yet a global water crisis threatens our future. The World Health Organization, now again, that's an organization of death. Okay, let's make no bones about that. The World Health Organization, or the WHO, even states that by 2025, half of the world's population will live in areas with permanent water scarcity. What are the causes and consequences of water scarcity? And can we still turn the tide? We will explain more about the causes and consequences of water scarcity and about what the future will bring. The World Health Organization is lying to all of us. Many, many lies, okay? And one of the biggest lies is the disinformation of where water comes from. And they give you all of these subtitles. How about water scarcity worldwide? And we're headed to a very thirsty future. And even UNICEF is involved in this disinformation. And they talk about how these major cities, such as Sao Paulo, Brazil, and India, and Cape Town, South Africa, and how they've previously suffered from water shortages. This is crisis acting. I want everybody to think about this. What we saw in Cape Town, demonstrated in the news and provided by CNN, which is a PSYOPs organization, where they were saying that there was going to be 0-day water in Cape Town, and it showed these villagers lined up to spigots with a little water dribbling out, and they were collecting them in plastic jugs. If you didn't see all of that, that's a description. And they said that they just had a few days, and there were going to be 0-day water. There would be no water. And this was, again, reported on CNN. And the WHO is also raising the alarm. They predict, the WHO, they predict that by 2025, half of the world's population will live in areas, again, with permanent drought and scarcity. That is not true. Now, Paul, when you have such enormous funded false front organizations representing scientific fraud, how is the average person going to work around this? Is it just one by one? We go around the rules. We get to water any way we can. What do you recommend? Because I am seeing this falling upon us right now. Here in America, water has just been created on the Mercantile Stock Exchange in Chicago to be traded like gold and oil. And they're basing the cost of the value of water on California water prices, which they're creating the illusion of scarcity, all created. So when you hear about the monstrous overlords deceiving us, what do you have to say other than, I guess, just keep learning the truth?
Well, it would be good to be able to understand, for the average person to understand, that water is in fact 2 parts hydrogen and 1 oxygen.
Well, Paul, I want to talk about some of the drilling that you did here 6,000 feet up above the Mojave Desert, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But I wanted to jump in and just add right now, I found a very riveting document that is discussing the invisible water crisis. And I want to say this. The disinformation that is being told to all of us from what we consider to be our lead agencies to protect us, which is disinformation on steroids, and speaking of steroids, they're talking about this document called The Invisible Water Crisis. And I would invite everybody to take a look at this. And I can tell you that intentionally, pharma is working with these deceptors on water, inability to access water, and they're intentionally poisoning the water worldwide. You said earlier, Paul, that water's made from hydrogen and oxygen, and they can literally use the hydrogen for other purposes. Well, they're also reducing the oxygen in the water supply. And with the use of electromagnetic frequencies, they're heating up the water. They're creating plankton and molds. And I know that here last week, you and I did at least, I had red flag fire warnings. And in Florida, they had red tide warnings. We are seeing more toxic funguses and types of molds and mildews as a result of what is being done to us with electromagnetic frequencies. But I read in this document something so disturbing. They talked about how the majority of the lakes worldwide are so toxic, and it's not reported because of all of the pharmaceuticals that are being distributed to people, all the psych drugs, all the hormones, all the drugs that are ending up in the water supply. And they talk about hypoxia, and that's a condition that arises when water bodies lack sufficient oxygen, and that's emerged as a growing problem throughout the water bodies of the entire world. They say hypoxia occurs when concentrations of oxygen fall below 2 to 3 milligrams of oxygen per liter of water. The complete absence of oxygen leads to creating dead zones in which few life forms can survive. This is being intentionally done under the guise of our agencies that claim they're supporting public health when in fact they are decimating our ability to survive. And water is key. They're poisoning the water. That means the food is poisoned. And as I looked at this hypoxia condition and the reduction of oxygen in the water supply, and they talk about also with the dead zones, they say that the impacts can be long-lived. Ocean floors can take more than 1,000 years to recover from low oxygen events. And there are these articles and these studies relating to this. These events are expected to become more widespread as farming and ranching practices continue to expand and as global ocean temperatures rise because of climate change, fueling larger algae bloom events. They have weaponized the environment. They are creating and planning the storm and weather events, pushing us into droughts that are long and dry and telling us we're running out of water. So, Paul, when you hear this kind of information, and I know we've got to stick to how people can access water, but people need to understand the sheer need to understand the truth of water. Now, would you explain to me, as you did so long ago, about the Hungarian phenomenon? I was stunned by that. Would you explain that to the audience?
Well, it is called the Hungarian phenomenon because from one place in Europe, in Central Europe to be exact, on the east slopes of the Carpathian Mountains, there were a group of people born there with an incredible ability in the fields of sciences. In other words, they had minds that could solve scientific problems. A good portion of them were Jewish, because these people settled in clumps, as it were, and they have been trying to figure out why would that place produce so many brains, as it were. Did a Martian space ship landed there, or what? Well, I don't think so. Most people agree that studied the place that it had to do with that which is our life source. Our bodies are well over nearly 2/3 water, just similar to the makeup of the planet, including the oceans. And those people, obviously, we pass on our genetics via water. I mean, you have to have water for everything. You're not going to have it. So the latest concept on giving an explanation of why this concentration of people came out of the foot of the Carpathian Mountains. There still is no definitive answer, but obviously it wasn't inbreeding. It had to do with the food, and that is, then the conclusion would be that is the source, which was water. So there's some water that's coming up there that will have to be looked at further. I hope the day will come so I can better understand it myself.
Well, I want to say, Paul, when you look at some of these documents that I've been looking at, and I see the intention of stupefying us with poisons and toxins intentionally in the water supply, and it's no wonder that we have a degraded IQ worldwide. It's no wonder that we're not able to see things that are obvious, particularly the enormity of what has become so obvious now on so many levels. But when I read some of these documents like this, and I read about the human impacts, and one of the greatest risks they're saying in this document is the increasing prevalence of anti-microbial resistance, the ability of microbes to grow in the presence of antibacterial, and they talk about antifungal drugs that would normally kill or limit their growth. And they say the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases in 2009, the antimicrobial resistance occurs naturally over time through genetic changes and the natural selection process. However, the introduction of antibiotics into natural environments has accelerated this evolution, threatening the effective prevention and treatments of a range of infections. And this is a new global study on the pharmaceuticals in the environment found between 1995 and 2015. And aquatic exposure to the antibiotic cephaloflaxin have proliferated throughout the globe. And they have a map. This is intentional dumping and intentional stripping of the benefits of the primary water. Now, Paul, I'm going to ask you some of the questions I typically get asked, and I really appreciate your response to these things, because people will say to me, well, is primary water clean? Are there these types of atmospheric poisons in primary water?
Yeah, it would follow logic that yes. The answer is yes. They would be clean because nothing will have affected these deep-seated sources.
Because they're down below the toxins, right? And it's not made into water yet.
Absolutely. Water is still in the process of being made H2O. You know, on the way up, those waters that are come on the way up, they will interact with the already deposited minerals. So some of those waters that will surface will not necessarily be all that good. So you will have to check, see exactly what are the minerals. We're not talking about biologicals now. We're talking about strictly minerals. Because, for example, if that water on its way up at a superheated temperature goes through pyrites, say, for example, arsenopyrites, and it is able to leach along with the pyrites this substance that you know as arsenic, this mineral. My God, you can't find a nastier poison than that. But by and large, you can make that statement that after checking the mineral content of these waters, you can pretty much just, never mind, see exactly what the drilling process will bring forth.
So, yeah, what I really would like to also discuss as well, I'm going to throw this in right now because I'm looking at a document from the World Economic Forum. Here's the title, everybody. If you want to make progress on all the major global challenges, start with water. So we're being deceived by water. You're hearing the water facts right now. And we're going to be discussing now some of the realities. Now, you heard me say earlier, and Paul, you taught me this, and I didn't know it before I knew it. And what I said earlier was that we never needed reservoirs, and that reservoirs literally are cauldrons of toxic runoff that is collected, and other seepage, and overhead chemtrailing, and all of the radiation that has been settling on us from radiation managed leaks, not only in the United States, but other locations as well. And we can also consider Fukushima as a managed toxin as well. I've done shows on gamma radiation, so you could certainly go back to stopthecrime.net and look at that. But all the surface water, the secondary water supply, which is snow and rain, snowmelt and rain, is toxic. And when it's collected in reservoirs...
It's toxic to the point where it has been contaminated by occupancy. I mean, you know, you can't have this many. We have, I don't know how many billion people now on this planet. And given certain locations, depending on how many people occupy a given area, you know, because of drugs and because of fertilizers, etc., you're going to contaminate the surface. And that surface contamination, in fact, will add to the quality of the water below, which is surface water or atmospheric. So that has to be reckoned with.
Well, it does, but also what was interesting with my studies about increasing toxins in the water was that farmers here in the United States, in order to engage in trade and get reimbursements from the government, they had to use certain fertilizers. And many of those fertilizers were very, very toxic and poisonous. They've had to use GMO and other poisons in order to comply. So we're being intentionally poisoned from all levels, and it's affecting...
All because of total stupidity. We can't afford to give ourselves the kind of a license that we have and not understand the stuff that makes up our bodies. I mean, my God, we're not only our bodies, but the planet is the water planet. And you know, we are either well or not well. And you know, and now that we get smart enough or dumb enough to make all this material to put into our liquid supplies, which grows food, you know, in many instances, we're killing ourselves. And
well, you know, Paul, I would embellish upon that by saying that there is a genocide plan. And in the United States, based on Deagle.com and also the report from Iron Mountain, which shows in the report from Iron Mountain that was released right after or soon after John F. Kennedy was murdered or assassinated, it talked about an annual reduction of the population as agreed worldwide by all the major superpowers, that they were to keep their populations down. And they talk about that as a form of peace, P-E-A-C-E, their peace. And when I first heard about the report from Iron Mountain, along with learning about water and everything else that I was learning about, it made absolute sense when I started to find out how toxic everything was intentionally done. It is being intentionally done by people that have the power, the money, and simply want fewer people on this planet. And so when I think about drilling for water, which many people listening right now might be thinking about, they need to be thinking about it, because I've been with you on several primary water drills, and I've watched it. I've seen it with my own eyes. I can say that people that are able, that have the land and can, at this point in time, send you a topography map of the land, which they can contact you through primarywaterinstitute.org. Again, primarywaterinstitute.org. If you have a topography map and you are on some land, you can forward that map to Pal Pauer, and he can take a look at that map and see where on your property, and it would be a good idea to potentially sketch out where your buildings or structures are on that land if you have buildings and structures, and see where that likely potential drill site might be. Now, Paul is in his 80s. His home was burned down in the Oregon fires last year. He lost everything in 15 minutes. Everything was gone. And you're returning to Hungary soon, are you not?
That's correct.
And so I would recommend all of you that are listening, it's a late start. Sadly, we've been talking about this for a number of years now, and it's never too late until it is too late. And right now, with the skids being put on your ability to get to water, I would highly recommend you don't procrastinate, hesitate, or go on unacknowledging the facts, because our lives are dependent. And we would love to see more people survive the death throes of deception. So some of the basic questions that I get all the time, Paul, and that I know you do too, and I'd like you to talk to people about this, and explain the drilling techniques, the differences between, because many people will tell me, well, Deborah, I have a well on my property, so I don't need to drill for primary water. So how would you answer somebody that says that?
Well, many of them, probably some of them, will have a well there on their property that is in fact primary water, region. But most of them aren't. It depends on the type of material that the well was drilled into. If it's in an alluvial fan, means sand and gravel, bottom basin. Chances are those waters are accumulated because of rainfall and runoff. Those have a much higher content of minerals. Some of them are definitely not good. So the only way I could tell is basically look at the property and look at the structure, and then from that one you can pretty much see how much alluvial fan there is on the property.
Well, in regards to that, also, I learned from you that well drillers are not taught about primary water. They don't even know that they're drilling for primary water. And very typically, they just get down to a level and they hit some water. And then they sleeve it with a plastic pipe, that they gravel pack it, and they walk away. Well, in a few years, that person may pump that well dry. Then they're told they're out of water. Well, that's not true, because the well drillers don't know what they're doing. And I've encountered that a number of times. These guys just are not taught the water facts. And so you, as a customer contracting a well driller, you would have to understand that you're needing to be insistent on getting through the alluvial soil that you just heard Paul talk about. That's the gravel and sands. And then get into the rock, get into the structure. When you get into the structure, now correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Paul, when you get into the structure, you don't need to sleeve it with plastic and gravel pack it. You don't want to, because that's preventing the seepage from the structure to come into the well. And you only need to sleeve and gravel pack through the loose material until you hit the rock, so that that loose material won't cave into the well. Is that right, Paul?
That's correct. So you don't want to have any interaction with surface waters, atmospheric waters, to interact with that which comes from down below. So you have to drill into solid rock deep enough, sometimes 10, 15 feet, and then you can seal off anything from the top, at which point you will only be dealing with waters that are coming from down below.
So I know I've been on some drills with you where you literally had to do a special process to develop the well, and I was really surprised. It was a new experience. It's not what well drillers would typically do, because they don't do it. Because when you sleeve and gravel pack all the way down, as well drillers do, you wouldn't put in the dry ice. That would then, it made, when I remember that we did this, Paul, it was making a washing machine sound down below when the ice was put in there, the dry ice, and we had to stand back because it would. I remember it gurgitated for quite a while, and then all of a sudden it blew out. And I remember it blew up about 40 feet, and it was really dirty and muddy looking. Can you explain what that did to that process of the well?
Well, we were in the solid structure. We were in solid structure. We were in, I believe, on that one. Anyhow, it was solid structure, and what it did it blew out all the material from the well. It froze everything inside of that, and then it blew everything out of there to permit more water to come in. And it was really good, gratifying to see that thing work time and again.
And that's one thing that well drillers don't do, because they've sleeved it in plastic. You wouldn't do that in a plastic sleeved well, right?
No, you couldn't. You couldn't actually. It wouldn't work.
Right.
So you have to do it right after you finish drilling, before you put anything in that borehole.
So let me understand then, so that the people are understanding. There are processes of drilling for primary water that you're going to need to know about. All of you listening, you're going to need to know, because your well drillers don't. And we're describing, literally, in some instances, when you have to develop the well, you use dry ice. But now you don't always have to develop the well, because sometimes when you drill, so much water's coming out, there's no need to drill, right?
Absolutely.
There's no need to put the dry ice, I meant to say.
No, at which point the well becomes sometimes even artesian. In other words, it starts to flow like a spring.
So
that depends on the size of the fractures that we drilled into. If those fractures are big enough, wide enough to produce all that extra water, then you don't have to open them up anymore.
So
because basically, when you use dry ice, you freeze everything in there, and when you freeze water in any kind of a container, be it a borehole or whatever, what you do is you crack the structure so that it permits more water to come in.
So you're cleaning out the dirt, which is why it blows out a muddy mud. And then I was noticing that then it became clean as it was blowing out.
Yes.
Okay. That's something very important for everyone that's listening that needs to be understood. Paul is going to be putting up some drill locations that he's filmed, so that you can actually see how this is done. It's going to be up to all of us to educate ourselves on getting to water, because our cities, our counties don't want us to get to water. And in some areas, there are even moratoriums on well drilling now. And I would highly suggest that if you are on a ranch or a farm and you have a little extra money, and it doesn't cost that much because, well, I shouldn't say it costs that much. What I mean to say is you don't have to sleeve it and gravel pack it all the way down like traditional well drillers do. You don't need all that extra plastic and gravel, and you really are going to have trouble getting plastic pipe now anyway, because of the resin shortage here in this country that's been intentionally created. All plastics are going to become very difficult to get. So if you are at all interested in surviving and you want to keep your farmland or your ranch, I could not promote further and more intensely, really, than to get to primary water. And don't continue to rely on the atmospheric water, which is controlled artificially, the rain and snowmelt. Another thing I think is very important, Paul, which I found also in some of the globalist documents, is the high concentration of plastic in all the water supplies and in all the fish population. And I was rather stunned to find out how that really fit in with the transitioning of us, humans, and other animals into a new man, into a transhuman, so to speak. I would recommend that all of you, just for an understanding of the enormity of the plastics, and it's not caused all by us. This is large institutional and corporate poisonings of all global water supplies. Okay, understand that. This is intentional. Think about all the lockdown and when we were having to get our food in containers. Look at the mass amount of containers that these poor, barely holding on restaurants and stores had to put the food in so that we could take it home and then throw all of that away. But what I was getting at is this video on, I think it's Netflix, and it's called Sea-Spiracy. Sea-Spiracy. I would recommend that everyone watch it. The beginning starts out, it is a documentary, and the beginning starts out with an idea of what they're hunting for and ends in an understanding of what they never anticipated. And I think all of us need to understand the enormity of the control and the intention to kill us, plain and simple, and to mutate us into a different type of human. And I have interviews by super soldiers that talk about the plasticity that is now formed in their skin. They can, in an instance, stretch a cheek 3 inches out from their face because of the plastic. So this is all carried and processed through our supply systems, through the resources that we are now getting. And water is one of the most dynamic and most polluted resources. Now, Paul, we talked about reservoirs and that we didn't need reservoirs. So would you explain to people why we never needed reservoirs and why we never needed the California Aqueduct or even the Colorado Aqueduct? And many of people that are visually not able to see what an aqueduct looks like. An example is you can just type in the California Aqueduct, and when you drive from San Francisco down to Los Angeles, you're driving for miles and miles right along the side of it, and it is just this long concrete channel that was built, and they're drying it up. I want to add one more thing, because I recently found out that Hoover Dam and Lake Mead are at all-time historical record lows in water. That is a process of dehydration through the technologies where they can dehydrate. They can cause evaporation and move water elsewhere. So the water is being evaporated out of the man-made lakes and being moved around. So they're showing you pictures in your news coverage of these arid ground areas that are parched, and you know what that looks like. They're really amplifying what it looks like to have no water. In fact, right now, too, they're moving villages in certain parts of the world, telling these people that have lived there for decades, generations, actually, that they have to relocate because they've run out of water, Paul. This is unbelievable. The dismantling of community, the forced relocation of people over trickery and lies because not enough people know the water truth. Now, I want to jump into probably a few more things to discuss about well drilling that I can think of. But right now, I just wanted to revisit that book we spoke about a little while ago, the book New Water for a Thirsty World, and that it's the best reference book that's published about the science and techniques of drilling for primary water. Again, Michael Salzman wrote the book with the foreword from Aldous Huxley. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it was published in the early 1960s. And it is available as a free download. Again, those books were bought up and destroyed when they hit the availabilities back in the 1960s, and that's why you must download this book and read it. And luckily, we still have, and there still are copies. Paul has that book on primarywaterinstitute.org.
I had it until the East Fire up there in Talent, Oregon. I lost all my books up there.
So you got burned out and you lost all those books.
Indeed.
Well, everyone listening, you can download this book, and you need to. And I would highly recommend you can go to certainly Paul's website, primarywaterinstitute.org or primarywater.org. Download New Water for a Thirsty World immediately. Download it. Study this thing. because your life will depend on your understanding where water comes from and how you can get to it, because you may need to work together with some farmers or ranchers and assist with them getting to primary water, helping set up a drill rig, and get this done as soon as possible. So we talked about why the cover-up and why preventing people from knowing about primary water and why it is not taught in colleges or taught in universities or even taught to well drillers. They have no knowledge about drilling for this kind of water. And it's astounding when you understand the enormity of what we're talking about on this program this evening, Paul. You and I have done a number of programs. We have many interviews.
When you drill a water well, approximately 3,000 to 4,000 feet above the Great Mojave Desert, and when you look down on that Great Mojave Desert, which is almost like being on an airplane, and right next to it, you get a well that's producing up to 600-700 gallons of water a minute, just what is visible. You've got to be asking some questions. Where did this water come from?
Well, let me go into that a bit, because what Paul's talking about right now is in the Tehachapies in California. It's called the Garlock, Garlock fault that runs through the property there. And Paul's longtime dream, and that of Stephen Reese as well, was to get into primary water. And I know Paul is a young man, and you can finish this story, but you went up 6,000 feet elevation, surrounded by the Mojave Desert and other arid areas, and you drilled for 2 wells. One was only at 60 feet in depth. That's 60 in depth. And the other one was only 100 feet in depth. And you hit water at a 6,000-foot elevation. And it seemed as though that would have been enough water to supply most of Southern California. Is that right?
Well, if there were a couple more wells drilled there. I mean, we were 2,000 feet higher than what they call the Great Line in Southern California, which is that passage from the Great Valley over to the other side, to the LA side. We were 2,000 feet higher than that. So the amount of water that is in that structure is more than enough to supply everything else that Southern California needs.
Well, when you talk to me about an earthquake and how that could rupture several spots along the California Aqueduct or even the Colorado Aqueduct, which is all concrete, I actually called a couple of water agencies in the Los Angeles area, and I asked them number one, how much water in their location was coming from either the California or the Colorado Aqueduct. One of the areas, a large area in Southern California, said they get a blend of water from both aqueducts. And I said, so you're receiving no water from any other sources. You have no groundwater wells in your jurisdiction. It's just simply coming from a blend of the 2 aqueducts. And I was told yes. And then I said, well, if there was a disruption with one of the aqueducts, such as, quote unquote, climate change, which is, again, planned targeting of weather weapons and including earthquakes. So I said, and I didn't say that, of course, to this poor man, but I asked if there was a disruption, say from an earthquake, and one of the aqueducts went down, how many days of water would you have to supply your customers with? And they told me 7 days, Paul. 7 days. And this was not all of Southern California or Los Angeles. This was a portion of a particular water district. I want that to be very clear.
It depends on how much reservoirs did they have available that they keep filling all the time.
Yeah, well, he told me, though, based on based on what they had available, they would have enough water for 7 days.
It's not very much.
No.
So at that point in time, what are you going to do with 18 to 20 million people?
Well, it wasn't the entire area. Again, I want to be clear. I called several water agencies, and different water agencies serve different areas of the Southern California.
Let me add this much, that their main source lies with those deliveries that comes from either the California Aqueduct or elsewhere. But they all interchange. In other words, I'll lend you this many 100,000 gallons, and you give me back that many. So when the bottom line is if there's no water coming from anybody's IOU, it's just like how much IOU do I have to have for you? If I can't deliver on my IOUs, guess what? You ain't getting paid.
Well, worse, they can force relocation of communities, which is in the Sustainable Development Plans.
That would have to, first of all, you'd have to have a massive water lift with trucks and every other thing just for drinking water. Never mind the farms, etc. But it's such a thing that I don't even want to think about. But I did at one time, and I thought to myself, that's idiotic. We have all of our eggs in one or two baskets, and any one of those baskets gets crushed. Gosh, what's going to happen?
Well, I think people that are listening have to wrap their head around the fact that what we're talking about has been intentional. It has been a long time in the planning. And when you told me originally that we did not need to move water around in aqueducts or even reservoirs, we're now seeing that reservoirs have become targets for weather weapons. And why I say that is because we hear about atmospheric rivers. In fact, I found an interesting YouTube recently called Tsunami from Heaven. You all might want to check that out. It showed an atmospheric river like a tsunami dumping in an already it looked like a filled lake or a river. And of course, that would breach the banks and wash out farmlands and put people underwater. Very similar to what we saw recently happen in Australia. So we're facing historic assaults on all of us. And I would say the best news, Paul, is what we're giving people and what you've worked your entire life to help people get to, and that's pure, fresh, clean, intelligent water. And when I think about this, Paul, and the investment of your life in attempting to get this known, and how few people know, it boggles my mind. It just really does.
No, what I would like to call attention to everybody who listens is independence. It's not like checking off the grid. Like that means you don't need anything but whatever. But if you don't have water, at least have water independence. So if something happens, for whatever reason you don't get your water allotment, be it for a farm or your house or yourself, have a backup. You right now, and no one has a backup. That could be a disaster, especially for us out here in the north and southwest. So I would urge everyone to really check out to see that they could actually obtain a backup system. In other words, their own water source, at least for drinking.
Well, what's also true, many people are storing up bottled water. And people are not aware of the high toxicity level of the stored up plastic water bottles and the fact that it's atmospheric water. It's poisonous to begin with.
Yeah, it's not glass for sure. But the fact is that it's time for everyone to take a look at exactly what kind of a backup system they have. If we have done nothing this last hour but talked about that, that, hey, take a look at your water situation. I would feel gratified that I will have contributed that much.
Well, Paul, you've contributed your lifetime to getting this information out. And all the wells that you have been responsible for drilling and traveling all over the world to provide for people. And for all of you that are listening, you need to understand. Here's what the World Bank is saying. They are going to finance countries, and they're going to capture and control all water operations. They're going to get into reuse programs. This is toilet to tap. The World Bank is going to help countries build wastewater treatment plants. What I have to say about this is we are in a circular economy, which is created under the illusion of zero waste and a new world, a green world. That is dangerous and deadly. And what is occurring is what we're seeing now during the lockdowns of what we've all been through well over a year now. And what we're seeing and what the World Bank is telling us is how they're going to support water utilities during this entire COVID siege. And what they're saying is that they're going to help water utilities that are struggling with loss of revenue. Because you know what? Many people, when they lost their jobs and they couldn't pay their water bills, also the same thing with some of their electric bills, they weren't required to pay. So the water companies were floating a lot of people that couldn't pay. And because the World Health Organization and Fauci and the others said we need to wash our hands, so water had to be available. So they've put all of your local utilities and water operations in massive debt, huge loss of revenue due to COVID, all part of what was planned around this whole COVID debacle. And they've reduced the availability of critical material, and they've deferred investments because of the increased cost of all the PPEs. And they've kept water flowing, though, they're proud to say, during the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. But the World Bank is going to be helping utilities address their challenges through resources and through operations. What is happening right now is your local water resource companies are selling you out to control under the World Bank and other controlling operators, world operators. They have long since looked at the United States as a water market. And I can tell you there are many, many NGOs and many large corporations and mega money that is selling you out. And your local presumed elected officials, your county city council members, your county boards of supervisors, your water agencies, I cannot tell you. And Paul, you've seen videos where we've gone and told them about primary water. They've done nothing about it. They're selling us out. That's why now they're putting on the wireless smart water meters, because in the sustainable development plans that your cities have adopted on your behalf, whether you know it or not, those are adopted. And how you would find out about that is you would type in the name of your city. For example, I could type in Sonoma County, and would type in two different things. I would type in climate action plans, and then I would also type in climate emergency resolution. Now, the climate action plans are usually a few hundred pages, but the climate emergency resolutions puts those plans into action. And it is about reducing and limiting transportation, which we're seeing happening, phasing out of what they call fossil fuels, phasing out. That's why you're hearing only electric everything, and reducing your access to water. And they're also phasing out your local farms. They're destroying your local farms. That's happening here right now. And we've just recently heard locally that one rancher has had to make the tough decision of selling off his 600 so plus head of cattle. But that's another topic in and of itself. So when we look at what has occurred and what is occurring and what Paul just said to all of us, you must get to water. This is everyone's individual responsibility because your city won't do it for you. No one is going to do it for you. So I would recommend that you look at the opportunities of people you may know that have the opportunity, just need the money, and you help support getting to a primary water distribution point so that you can utilize that water. And I would also recommend that that be not far from your homes because we know that travel is going to be greatly impacted. And with the required transition from all vehicles to electricity, including all trucks, everything electric, it's going to be very difficult. I don't even see the cost. I know that the small well drillers, Paul, won't be able to stay in business if they have to move from diesel. I think most of them are diesel now, right?
Yeah.
Their trucks operate on diesel. So if they're forced to transition to electric, I think they're going to put a large percentage of the small well drilling outfits out of business, because I know with the sewer pumping companies that pump septic tanks, about 5 or so years ago, they were all on gasoline, and they were required, in order to continue pulling their licenses for pumping sewers, they had to transition to diesel. And I remember talking to a couple of these small operators that at that point, they were almost having to consider going out of business because of the cost of transitioning to diesel. Well, now we're being forced into electric. And in California, as well as many other states, you won't be able to buy gas-powered vehicles. They're being phased out. In other words, they're all being phased out. You're going to look at your gasoline, anything, and they're just going to be paperweights. So I guess I would like to leave those that are listening right now with the understanding that Paul has put his entire life behind primary water. He taught me what I never knew. I had to go and find out for myself that it was true, that it was real. It sounded, as I told you, foreign to my ears initially. Then I found out it was true. It was so true and so horrifically deceived to all of us that I couldn't imagine that this large of a concealment could occur, but it has. And you have all a small window. More importantly, you have the opportunity, though, to learn the water facts. So of everything you would have to say to the listeners right now, Paul, because I know we're going to be working really hard on putting videos together of well drilling that you've done so people can watch how this is done. I know that, again, we said this a bit ago, but it's important to say it again. People say, well, gosh, do you have to drill thousands of feet? Well, of course not. Typically, you tell people to expect to drill about 150 feet, but that can be determined if they might hit water sooner, like you did on the Garlock site, right?
Yes. Anyhow, what I would like to leave with the listeners is I would like to ask everyone to please pick up a glass, fill it with water. Just fill it with water, a drinking glass, and ask yourself, how could this liquid, which is water, be 2 parts hydrogen gas and 1 oxygen? And how did it get that way? That's it. If they would think about that, we are the water planet. We are by no means out of water. How are you going to be out of water on a water planet? Albeit we are not going to have water in places where we would like to have, and the type of water that we would like to have. But we are living in a water planet, and this year, 21st central technology is going to prohibit us from, not I shouldn't say prohibit, but will make us be out of water. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, it's frightening because I know that millions of people are going to be unable to survive. They won't be able to grow their food that they need.
They're going to have to start thinking for themselves a little bit.
That's right.
We can't do their thinking. They have to think, and then they're going to have to wonder, how could we be out of water on a water planet? For heaven's sakes, let's start there.
Well, that's a good start, and I want to just add this, because people are being told that not to worry. We're going to reuse and make water out of wastewater treatment plants. That's your poop and your urine, and that is chemicals and drugs of undetermined poisons. Well, they're not undetermined. In the documents, they know what they're doing, and they're doing this. So there has been millions and millions of money now being sent to other countries through the World Bank and other finance arms to build wastewater treatment plants. I know that here in the United States a few years ago, when via executive order, they committed to building more wastewater treatment plants to sidestep the drought, so that under lengthy and long-term droughts, we would have plenty of water because we could reuse our human waste, the toilet to tap. Very poisonous and very toxic. The next thing they talk about as a solution for water, Paul, and you've heard this, I have too, is desalinization. That is the most insane thing that anyone could ever do. The cost of that, the energy used for that, when there's creating massive disinformation about where pure, clean primary water comes from.
You know, that's the same kind of a propaganda that we had, that the world got when they decided that atomic energy is the solve it all, be it all, solve it all. Well, now, you know, we are going to, yes, we can desalinize, even at an acceptable cost. But what are we going to do with all this salt?
Yeah.
That will be the residue. The residue is going to become a problem. You can't just dump it right back to where you got the water from. Sooner or later, that anyhow.
Well, you know, they have a motto. They have a saying for that. The solution to pollution is dilution. And they've done the same thing with fluoride. So with the sludge and all of the other byproducts of poisons that are heightened because it's consolidated, they'll probably sell it as, well, who knows, dump it back into the rivers. But also another thing that they're going to be doing with the wastewater treatment plants, they're going to create a blend. And what I mean by that is the documents have discussed that the sewer pumpage trucks will deliver water upstream from the reservoirs so that it has time to mix as it tumbles into the toxic cauldron called a reservoir. Now, I wanted to say one more thing about reservoirs that you taught me that was just unbelievable. And that was the fact, again, we never needed reservoirs. We could have done what Muammar Gaddafi did with the Great Man-Made River Project. We didn't. Instead, we built future weapons, which are reservoirs now. And with the degradation of the dams because of the high intensity of the electromagnetic frequencies, which is literally pulsing all structure, buildings, bridges, we have a massive disintegration of infrastructure, not only in the United States, but worldwide, because of the pulses of frequencies that are being intentionally increased worldwide that are tearing apart the infrastructure. And when we look at the near misses that we've had with some of the large dams here in the last few years in California, one of the dams had it breached, and it was close to breaching. They were on the verge of evacuating over 250,000 people. Remember that, Paul?
I certainly do. I could not go. It was advised that I shouldn't go via I-5 even below Sacramento.
Right, because the water would have inundated.
Feather River was near bursting. I mean, these people, they think that they have a technology to do a lot of things. But I suggest that they take a look at that which is a true and tried so-called technology, which means get water, look down, and the water is below your feet.
That's right.
And then you can decide what kind of a water it is, because you can quickly establish as to its quality. And we can get always enough water out of there.
The thing, too, that really opened my eyes to the theft, the deception, the greed, is what I'm seeing happening now with all of the water emergency grants that governors now are calling for, millions and millions of dollars to help farmers during this drought. That is money being stolen, sinking America in unrecoverable debt, all because of the deception, well, not all and only, but because of the deception of where water really comes from. So we're seeing millions being asked for by the California governor here, who's a Freemason, by the way, and more, and to be distributed at taxpayers' expense. In fact, in the documents that I found, all remedies for water shortages is to be at taxpayers' expense, because they're telling us there's simply too many people using too much water. That is not true. There is enough water for everybody that's alive on this planet. And
most of us that have been alive for more than 30 years. 30 years ago or more, we heard about how we're not going to have enough food to feed the rest of the world here. In other words, at that time, I think we had 1 billion or 2 people less on this planet. And guess what? We have more than enough food to feed everybody. And that goes for water, too. We are not running out of water. What we are not running out of also is manipulators that manipulate the cost of water. And
when I think about what is being done, I can't help but put a different word to that. Manipulators is one word. Murderers is another, because they are withholding the water truth from the populations worldwide and forcing relocations, water refugees that I mentioned, closing down lands, causing, and of course the land theft that they intend, poisoning all the water supplies worldwide on the atmospheric level. And Paul, I want to thank you for literally redeeming your life on the understanding of primary water. And I cannot tell you the privilege that it's been for me to have been taught by you the limited amount of understanding that I've garnered over the years in knowing you, Paul. And I hope
thank you, Deborah.
Yeah, and I just hope that everyone listening takes this information and uses it for your benefit, for the preservation of humanity, as long as we're able to continue to survive, because we're up against massive odds, not just water, but water is one of the prime elements that we need: air, water, and food. And upon that, survival continues. Without any of that, we're gone. And much of that is already being reduced. The air is being reduced because of the depleted oxygen in the environment. The water is being deceived. We're being told we're running out. And the food, we're being told, is now scarce and we're running out of food. And all of that is a lie. It's a setup. And we're all being orchestrated under fear. And I think that there's an empowerment of knowing what's real. And I will say this, Paul, because there are going to be many people that are going to be stuck. They're in a city They can't drill a well. They don't know of anybody that they could help drill a well. And they're going to be stuck with a smart water meter, and they're going to have reduced access to water. I know right now in the city of Marin near us, they're only allowed to water their outside landscaping one day a week. They are rounding up citizen snitch groups now. This happened a few years ago, where your neighbors go around and with their cell phones. There's a special app. They will take photographs of any water seepage that's coming off your property, down your driveway or into the gutter, and they will send your address and that photograph to code enforcement. Now, right now in Marin, I believe the fines are $250, and that's only the beginning. Again, as I said earlier in this show, they've already cut back delivery here 20%. They're not even leaving it up to the people to reduce their usage by 20%. In your climate action plans and in the sustainable development plans, massive reductions of water are required. Massive. And that is going to decrease the oxygen, because they want all of your plants replaced with plastic grass or gravel, because you're not going to have enough water to water your outdoor landscaping. And especially as as they call it, global climate change and global warming increases in heat, which is also something else that is going to be done to us, all planned and activated with technology, massive heat events without water. So I can't say enough, Paul, for the years that you've been working to get this information out. I hope everybody heard this tonight, and that they activate and become self-reliant and responsible for their own lives. So is there any last words, Paul, that you would like to say before?
I would just like to say that I much appreciate your time and your efforts too, Deborah, and all who listened. Please just take a look at that glass of water in your hand, and lift it up and take a look. That is 2 parts hydrogen and 1 oxygen. That's what that is. And anyhow, I thank you. I thank you for all who will think about the fact that we are the water planet. And no, it is nonsense. We don't have a water shortage. We are just unable, or have not figured out, or didn't care to think about how we are going to use our sweet water and salt water, because we have both of it. So I really thank you for the audience.
Well, Paul, I thank you. And so for all that's listening, please go to stopthecrime.net. I've certainly been talking to Paul for a number of years now, and we've had many lengthy discussions. Now it's time for you to learn the truth for yourself. This is probably the best news of anything that's happening in our world right now, is that water is renewable. But the best news is sadly being covered up by the illusion that we're running out. Don't be deceived. Don't be easier to kill because of lack of knowledge. Learn the truth. And I want to thank Doc for allowing us this opportunity to get this information out this evening. Doc, thank you ever so much.
Oh, my pleasure. I even forgot it was my show for a while, because I was like a guest, or like a listener. It was so, of course, it was disturbing in some aspects, yes. But yeah, anytime you'd like to come on, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Doc.
Thank you very much.
You too, Paul.
Me too, all. I thank you guys all. It has been a privilege. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. All right. So that was Deborah Tavares and Pal Pauer, and mind-opening show. I'm gonna have to listen to it again just to wrap my mind around some of it. I knew that they were recycling water, but it was getting pretty gruesome at the end. So we look forward to having Deborah back on again as well. So, oh man, that just wow. I did not expect all that. That was amazing, amazing show. Join me again next Thursday and right here on 1028 Productions here on YouTube and Facebook and anywhere else that they'll allow me. So thanks a lot. We'll talk to you guys next time. And remember, as long as we all lift each other up, we will all rise together. I'm Doc Skinner. Good night.